Hi, I'm Celine. Welcome back to my channel. And today I'm going to be talking about Nella Larsen, an American author that I think is really brilliant. And I'm going to be talking about her two only published books, which are Passing and Quicksand. So Nella Larsen was a novelist who lived from 1891 up to 1964, and she is one of the novelists that is seen as part of the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance is a period in American cultural history, and it usually goes or is seen to have gone from about 1918, so at the end of the First World War, up to the 1930s when the Great Depression hit. And it is a brief period during which there is like a huge revival of African American culture. So we're talking about literature, but also music, philosophy, politic thought. Like there's so much happening, and it all seems to be centered largely in the neighborhood of Harlem, which is in New York City. There's not a huge amount of biographical information about Nella Larsen and her life. One of the things that we do know, which was quite important to her, and it is a theme that sort of comes up in her writing in a lot of different ways, is that her mother was white and Danish, and she was an immigrant who moved to the United States, while she also had a black or mixed-race father. What we do know is that Nella Larsen saw herself as a mixed-race person, and that the question of what it means to have sort of a foot both in black society as well as in white society, or perhaps just not belonging to either of them at all, what that means and what that means for a person's conception of themselves. So the first book that Nella Larsen wrote is Passing. And this is a really short book. I think in my edition is less than 100 pages. So if you're looking for a short novel, this is a really good one. In Passing, we meet our main character, Irene, and Irene really has her life together. She is quite wealthy, she has a husband, she has kids. Her whole life is just going quite smoothly, quite well. She's the ideal of domesticity within this time. But her neat life is suddenly thrown into chaos because she meets Claire. And Claire is one of her childhood friends, and they used to be quite close, they grew up together. But Claire basically just went off and no one had heard from her in a really long time, and no one had any idea what she was up to. What Claire was up to was passing as a white person, even though she herself is a black person and has grown up in a black community, etc. But she's now passing as white, and even her husband doesn't know that she isn't white. And I think the idea of passing was just really relevant for society at this point in time, because socially, economically, and in so many different ways, society was just completely separated by race in the United States at this time. So what school you went to, what bars you went to drink, where you went dancing, all those kinds of things were all determined by your race. But of course, it is not actually all that easy to just physically determine whether someone is white or black. I know that even nowadays there seems to be like this idea that you can just tell, but realistically that is not the case. And although people like to think that they are sort of the masters of being able to discern where someone's from, realistically speaking, the context in which you see a person actually largely determines on how you see that person and where do you think that person came from. Because in the 20s, if someone had a dark skin color but was, for example, from Spain, that person was seen as white. Even though in terms of skin color, they were probably quite dark-skinned, but that was not really the issue. The issue was, do you or do you not have African American blood? But because it wasn't really just about skin color or just about features, that meant that people could push the boundaries and perhaps sometimes, if they were light-skinned enough, pass as white even though they were not. And when the main character, Irene, is faced with Claire, who is therefore like crossing boundaries that she had initially thought were uncrossable, seeing her do things that she thought weren't really possible, it really starts to crumble her perceived notions. And in essence, it really starts to break down just her complete identity and her sense of self. I think in a lot of ways, this is a novel that tackles such huge, complex topics, but it has, in a way, quite a light touch. So in terms of tackling these topics, it doesn't really go like, this is good, this is bad, you should not do this, you should do this. It's not really that kind of thinking. I think Nella Larsen really wants to look at these issues and slowly tease apart the various strands that make them up. So one of the questions that this novel poses is, what is solidarity with someone of the same race? You know, Claire is a black person, and so is Irene. Does that mean that they have a certain amount of responsibility for each other? Do they need to stand in solidarity together? And if yes, what does that mean? And what are the limits to that? Or if no, you know, what does that mean? And seeing that this is a work from the 20s, I think early 20th century novels have a tendency to be quite light touch, so where small interactions between people become really, really important. And I always think of that in contrast to the Victorian novel, where you just get 800 pages and by the end of it, you know exactly what the author meant. In this time period, I think authors really liked the minutiae of life. They really liked to really zoom in on really small interactions. And I think you can see that in Nella Larsen's work as well. I think she's a really brilliant writer, and this is such a short book, but it really packs a punch, and there are so many interesting layers to it. And I think it's such a shame that not a lot of people know about Nella Larsen, although there has been a recent movie adaptation. So there is a movie adaptation from 2021. I think it was written and directed by Rebecca Hall, and it also features Tessa Thompson as the main character. It's a really brilliant movie, and I really highly recommend both reading the book and watching the movie. I think the movie is actually really close to the book in terms of adaptation, and also interestingly, it was shot in black and white, which of course reflects to sort of the theme of the book. So we're passing wonders like, what does it mean to be part of a racial community? What does it mean when you refuse that identity and take on the identity of someone else? Nella Larsen's second novel deals with very similar questions, but in a slightly different way. So the second novel that she wrote was Quicksand. Quicksand features Helga Crane, and the character of Helga is based a lot on the author's own life. So Helga, for example, also has a Danish parent and is mixed race. During the novel, Helga also goes to Denmark and spends some time with some family members there, which is something that Nella Larsen has done as well. And where the main character in passing is really embedded in her own community. So she has all the friends, family, she's very much rooted in these communities. In Quicksand, Helga is rootless. Her parents are dead, her family members are too distant to be of any real use, and even if she is, with her, I think, aunt and uncle in Denmark, because Helga is dark-skinned, she doesn't really fit into Danish society either. But she also doesn't feel like she fits into Black society in the United States. And the book is characterized by this really intense restlessness. And I think reading the book is actually sometimes quite difficult and sometimes really frustrating, because wherever Helga goes, and she travels around a bit and she meets with various people and she becomes attached to various people, but she is always, always restless. It doesn't really matter where Helga is, she always feels like an outsider. She always feels like she's someone looking in, but that she's not truly part of the group that she is interacting with. And what I found really interesting about it is that, Nella Larsen is generally seen as part of the Harlem Renaissance, but Quicksand in particular also reflects back onto the Harlem Renaissance. And it shows, on one hand, just how much energy and how much joy the Harlem Renaissance brings. So the sort of cultural revival is really strong, and you can see that in Quicksand as well. But at the same time, there is this slight critique of how, to a certain extent, the Harlem Renaissance, it can seem limiting and exclusionary. And she shows that society of that time was quite insular and sometimes petty, with like infighting, etc. And that for someone who is mixed race, that kind of means that in a lot of ways the questions that are being asked by thinkers within this society, and this is fiction, so this doesn't really reflect on actual political thought within the Harlem Renaissance, but from Helga's perspective, some of the questions just seem irritating, and she feels like those questions don't really hit on the truth of the matter. Helga as a main character is really prickly, proud, and just generally not very likable. And I think the relationship between the reader and Helga as a main character sort of mirrors the relationship that Helga has with the people in her life. So on one hand, we're sort of enchanted, we're intrigued, we want to know more, we get closer. But the moment we get closer, the things that looked beautiful from the outside actually aren't, and we are pushed away in a certain way. And Helga and the reader also have that relationship because Helga is so unlikable, and the closer we get, the more we dislike what we see and we sort of pull back, which is exactly how Helga feels with the various people that she tries to surround herself with. Besides race, one of the themes that unite, I think, Quicksand and Passing is that they both reveal family life, sort of the idea of the nuclear family, the husband, the wife, the children. It reveals the family life as sort of something that is inherently unstable, something that sort of crumbles beneath your feet. And the way it interrogates sort of a female perspective on family life actually kind of reminded me of The Awakening by Chopin. In my opinion, Nella Larsen is a really brilliant writer, and I think it's a bit of a shame that, you know, because a movie has been made about Passing, I think she has increased a little bit in the public consciousness. But I do think it's a bit of a shame that not a lot of people have even heard of Nella Larsen, which is why I wanted to do this video. She is quite a succinct writer, so she's quite economical in the amount of words that she uses. Her books are quite short, but at the same time, in terms of thematical and content, I feel like there's just so much to explore. And I kind of hope that I might have intrigued you enough for you to consider picking up a Nella Larsen book. This video is part of my Women in History series, where I would like to focus on, you know, female creatives, just women in general in historical contexts, and also to look at female writers that might have been forgotten or just don't really get the credit that I think they deserve. So there will definitely be more videos about different authors and their works. As always, I am open to suggestions, so if you have read an author that you think, wow, that is really similar to Nella Larsen, you would love that, please let me know. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you again, maybe sometime soon. Bye!